My name is Carol, I'm 62 years old, and my daughter called me a pig at my own Thanksgiving table before kicking me out of the house I paid for. Before I tell you how I legally took back the entire empire I built for her, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all happened last Thanksgiving. The air in the house was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, smells I had known my whole life. The house itself, a beautiful two-story colonial in a quiet Ohio suburb, used to be mine. My late husband David and I bought it 30 years ago. But after he passed and my daughter Sarah got married, I gave them the house. A gift. I poured my entire life savings into the down payment for them, a cool $100,000, so they could start their family without a crushing mortgage. "This will always be your home too, Mom," Sarah had said, hugging me tightly on the day they moved in. Those words echoed in my mind now, a bitter, hollow sound. I had spent the entire week preparing for this meal. The turkey was a perfect golden brown, the skin crackling just so. The mashed potatoes were whipped with cream until they were like silk. The cranberry sauce, made from scratch, glistened in the crystal bowl like jewels. I did it all because I love them. That's what mothers do. The table was full. There was Sarah, looking stunning in a cashmere sweater, every inch the successful businesswoman. Her husband, Mark, sat at the head of the table, a place that used to be David's, swirling a glass of expensive red wine. And my grandchildren, Leo and Mia, their faces still sticky with a pre-dinner candy cane, were buzzing with excitement. I sat at my usual spot, at the end of the table closest to the kitchen, so I could easily get up for refills. Always the helper, never the guest. Dinner was a loud, happy affair. I watched them all eat, my heart feeling full and heavy at the same time. I waited until everyone had their seconds, until the plates were piled high and the initial ravenous hunger had passed. Then and only then I quietly reached for the bowl of mashed potatoes. I just wanted one more small spoonful for myself. It was my favorite part of the meal, the creamy, buttery comfort of it. My spoon hovered over the bowl. That's when it happened. "Mom!" Sarah's voice cut through the chatter like a shard of glass. "You eat like a pig. Maybe try a little dignity for a change." The words weren't shouted. They were spoken with a cold, clipped precision that was somehow worse. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the clink of Mark's fork as he set it down. My hand, the one holding the serving spoon, froze in midair. It felt like a punch to the gut, stealing all the air from my lungs. I must have misheard. Surely I had misheard. But then Mark let out a short, sharp chuckle. A snort of amusement. Leo and Mia, too young to understand the cruelty but old enough to follow their father's lead, let out a few high-pitched giggles. I looked around the table, from my daughter's hard, impatient eyes to my son-in-law's smirking face. No one spoke up for me. No one defended me. In that one awful moment I was completely and utterly alone, an unwelcome ghost at my own family's feast. A strange calm washed over me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even rage, not yet. It was a terrifying, crystal-clear clarity. The kind you get when something you've been carefully holding together for years finally shatters into a million pieces right in front of you. I slowly lowered the spoon, placing it back in the bowl without taking a single bite. The sound it made against the ceramic seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. I methodically wiped my mouth with my napkin, folded it, and placed it on the table. Then I pushed my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the floor made them all flinch. I stood up, my back straight, my hands clasped in front of me. I looked at each one of them, my eyes lingering on my daughter for just a moment longer. I cleared my throat, and my voice came out steady without a single tremor. "Enjoy your meal." I turned and walked away from that dinner table, down the long hallway that led to the front of the house. Each silent step on the polished hardwood floor was a promise I was making to myself. They would learn what it truly meant to lose everything. I didn't grab my coat from the hall closet. I didn't storm out into the cold November night. That would have been too easy, too predictable. That would have been the reaction of a victim. And in that moment, something inside me had shifted. I was no longer a victim. I was just quiet. I walked into the small guest room at the front of the house, the room that used to be my sewing room before they moved in, and it became a storage space for things they didn't want. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. The distant murmur of their voices, the sound of laughter starting up again in the dining room, was a faint, ugly hum through the solid wood. It was the sound of my own irrelevance. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, my hands folded primly in my lap, and I just stared at the beige wall. I didn't cry. The shock had bypassed tears and settled into a cold, hard knot deep in my stomach. It felt as if a surgeon had reached inside my chest and neatly excised my heart, leaving a clean, hollow space behind. My mind, however, was a chaotic storm, replaying the last 30 years in a dizzying, painful flash. I saw myself at 4 in the morning, my hands covered in flour, baking dozens of cupcakes for Sarah's elementary school bake sales before heading to my full-time secretarial job. I saw myself sitting in the bleachers at her soccer games, her swim meets, her debate tournaments, always her biggest cheerleader. I remembered the fierce pride I felt when she was accepted into Ohio State. I remembered the quiet, agonizing decision to cash in the bonds my own parents had left me, my only real inheritance, to ensure her college fund was robust enough that she could graduate debt-free. She had hugged me so tight that day, promising she'd make me proud. And this house, this beautiful, silent house, filled with ghosts of a life I thought I had. I remembered the day David and I signed the mortgage papers. He was so proud he squeezed my hand until my knuckles ached. "This is it, Carol," he'd whispered, his eyes shining. "Our forever home, where we'll watch our grandchildren play." He'd been gone for 15 years now, taken by a sudden heart attack that left a crater in my life I never thought would heal. For years, Sarah was the only thing I had left of him. And so, I had poured everything I was and everything I had into her. I gave her this house. I gave her the foundation for the perfect life she was now living. And in return, she had looked at me with disgust and called me a pig. My gaze drifted from the blank wall to the bottom of the guest room closet. Tucked away behind a stack of old photo albums and boxes of holiday decorations was a dusty, brown cardboard box. David's box. He was a meticulous man, a planner to his core. He'd worked as an accountant his whole life, finding a strange comfort in numbers and ledgers. "Love is love, Carol," he used to say, tapping his pen on a stack of neatly organized papers. "But business is business. You have to protect what you've built. Always." I hadn't opened that box since he died. The grief was too raw, the finality of his organized absence too painful to confront. But now a sudden urgent memory pricked at the edges of my mind, a conversation from long ago. I pushed myself off the bed, my joints protesting as I knelt on the plush carpet. I pulled the box out. It was heavier than I remembered. On top, written in David's neat, blocky handwriting that I knew as well as my own, were 2 words: legacy folder. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted the lid, a puff of dust making me sneeze. It wasn't just a folder. It was a thick black 3-ring binder, the kind lawyers use, packed to the gills with plastic sleeve documents. It felt heavy and important in my hands. I placed it on the bed and opened it, my fingers trembling slightly. The first page was a copy of a bank statement from 12 years ago. The highlighted line item showed a wire transfer of $100,000 from my personal savings account, David's life insurance money, to the escrow company for the down payment on this very house. Clipped to the top was a handwritten note from David on a yellow sticky note. Loan to Sarah for down payment. To be considered an investment in family property. Advised Carol to be added to the deed. I felt a jolt, a current of forgotten history running through me. I turned the page. There it was, a copy of the official house deed. And there in crisp typed lettering was my name, Carol Peterson, listed right alongside Sarah's and Mark's. I wasn't just a guest living on their charity. I wasn't just their live-in babysitter. I was a legal part owner of the roof over their heads. They had needed my name, my financial history, on the mortgage application to get approved for the loan amount they wanted. It was a detail I had long forgotten, a favor I had done without a second thought, because what mother wouldn't? Page after page, the story of my sacrifice and my hidden power unfolded. There were the incorporation papers for Sarah's chic downtown bakery, the Sweet Rise. I had helped her come up with the name one afternoon in my old kitchen. I had also, I now remembered with a jolt, been listed as a 50% partner in the business. It was David's idea, a condition of me giving her the $50,000 from my retirement savings to get it started. "It's a silent partnership, honey," he had explained to me. "Just a formality, a way to protect your investment in case things go south." Sarah had agreed readily at the time, desperate for the startup capital. And then I saw it. The final document tucked into the very back sleeve. The one that made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. It was the guarantee for a business expansion loan. $200,000. Taken out just last year so Sarah could install new industrial ovens and expand her catering services into a lucrative corporate market. And there, at the bottom of a page filled with terrifying legal jargon, was my signature. Bold and clear. I was the sole guarantor. My remaining assets, my healthy retirement accounts, my paid-off condo that I was renting out, were the collateral. She had wept with gratitude in my kitchen that day, telling me she couldn't have gotten this promotion in her business world, this chance to elevate her brand without my help. Holding that binder, a lifetime of quiet contributions documented in black and white, I wasn't an old woman to be pitied. I wasn't a burden to be shamed. I was an investor, a major shareholder, the silent, forgotten backer of their entire, perfect, curated life. The foundation they had just tried to sweep under the rug. And it was time to call in my debts. The first pale light of dawn was streaking the sky gray and purple when I finally closed the binder. I hadn't slept a wink. The initial shock and the cold, hollow grief had burned away through the long night, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. It felt like steel solidifying around my spine. I knew exactly who I had to call. My hands were steady as I found my phone and dialed the number from memory. It rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice, thick with sleep, answered. Arthur Friedman. Arthur, I said, my own voice surprisingly clear and even. It's Carol. David's Carol. There was a pause and I could hear him shifting the rustle of sheets. Then warmth flooded his voice, chasing the sleep away. Carol. Good heavens, it's been too long. Are you all right? It's not even 6 a.m. I need your help, I said, cutting straight to the point. There was no room for small talk, no energy for pleasantries. The time for that was over. I need a lawyer. The warmth in his voice immediately sharpened into professional concern. I could hear him sit up straighter. What's wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble? I will be, I said, a grim certainty in my words, if I don't do something. Can I come see you this morning? As soon as your office opens. My office is open now, he said, his voice firm, all business. I'll be there in an hour. Come in first thing. And Carol, bring everything. Arthur's office was in an old brick building downtown that smelled of old paper, leather, and his ever-present pipe tobacco. He had been David's best friend since they were kids, the best man at our wedding, and the man who had held my hand and guided me through the legal nightmare after David's death. He was a man I trusted implicitly. He looked older now, his once dark hair completely white and a bit unruly, but his eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses were as sharp and kind as I remembered. He greeted me at the door to his private office not with a handshake, but with a sad, knowing look, as if he could already sense the storm I was carrying. He closed the heavy oak door behind us, shutting out the world. Talk to me, Carol. What in God's name happened? I didn't speak. Instead, I walked to his desk, a grand, imposing piece of polished mahogany, and lifted the heavy legacy folder from my tote bag. I placed it squarely in the center of his desk. The thud it made seemed to echo in the quiet, book-lined room. He raised a bushy white eyebrow, opened the binder, and began to read. I sat in the leather chair opposite him, my back ramrod straight, and watched his face. It was a study in slowly building outrage. I saw his expression shift from polite curiosity to surprise to a deep, simmering anger on my behalf. He would murmur under his breath as he turned the pages. Good for you, David. Tapping a finger on a key phrase here, adjusting his glasses to read the fine print there. When he got to the section detailing the bakery's co-ownership agreement, he let out a low whistle that hung in the air. 50%, he said, looking at me over the top of his glasses. His eyes were wide. She made you a full, equal partner. A silent partner. I corrected him, my voice flat. So silent I think she and I both forgot it existed. He continued reading, his focus intense. The house deed. The notarized loan guarantee. He even found a document I had completely overlooked in my emotional haze. A durable power of attorney I had signed years ago, giving me authority over the children's welfare in case of an emergency. It was an emergency custody agreement, and it was still legally valid. When he finally reached the last page, he closed the binder gently, as if it were a sacred text. He leaned back in his creaking leather chair and steepled his fingers, looking at me with a mixture of profound pity and deep admiration. "Well, Carol," he said quietly, "David was a very smart man. He always said his greatest asset was you, and he made damn sure you were protected." He paused. "You've been holding a royal flush, and you didn't even know you were in the game." The tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry the night before pricked at my eyes. His validation, his recognition of the truth was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was rusted shut. "She called me a pig, Arthur," I whispered, the words still tasting like ash in my mouth. "She shamed me in front of my own grandchildren for taking a spoonful of potatoes." His kind expression hardened into a mask of professional steel. "Okay," he said, his voice now firm, decisive. "Okay, forget the game. This is war. What do you want to do? What's the objective?" "I don't want to ruin her," I said, the words catching in my throat because, God help me, it was still true. She was still my daughter. I want her to remember who she erased. I want her to feel my absence." Arthur nodded slowly, his mind clearly working, piecing together a strategy. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. "We can do better than that," he said, turning back to me, his eyes gleaming with a lawyer's righteous fire. "We won't just remind her that you exist. We will remind her that without you, her entire world ceases to exist. We'll do it cleanly. We will dismantle the life she took for granted, piece by legal piece, until she is sitting in an empty room with nothing but the echo of her own ingratitude." He came back to his desk and pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad. The scratch of his pen was the only sound in the room. "Here's the plan," he said, his voice a low strategic hum. "It's a two-pronged attack. First, this afternoon, I will draft a letter to the Commercial Loan Department at Ohio Capital Bank. We will formally notify them of a significant partnership dispute, and immediately, officially, freeze your name and your assets as the guarantor pending a full financial review of the business. That word, freeze, will set off every alarm bell they have. It will immediately halt their credit lines and put a hold on all major supplier accounts." I watched him write, my heart starting to beat a little faster, a terrifying and exhilarating rhythm. "Second," he continued, not looking up, "we will send a certified letter, return receipt requested, to the landlord of the bakery's building. We will formally assert your legal rights as a 50% owner on the commercial lease. We will request full copies of all financial statements, insurance policies, and service agreements for the past 5 years. The moment that letter lands on his desk, you're no longer just her mother who helps out on holidays. You're her business partner. A partner she has to answer to." He finally looked up at me, his eyes serious. "This will get ugly, Carol. She will scream. She will cry. She will try to manipulate you. Are you ready for that?" I thought of Sarah's cold, dismissive eyes, Mark's cruel smirk, my grandchildren's confused, imitative laughter. "Arthur," I said, and my voice was like iron, "let her scream." For 3 days there was nothing but a heavy, ringing silence. It was the loudest silence I had ever known. I stayed in the guest room, a prisoner in my own home, living on the granola bars and bottled water I found in the back of the closet. I could hear them moving through the house, their voices tense and clipped. They spoke in hushed, angry tones in the kitchen. I heard a door slam once, but they never knocked on my door. They never slid a note under it. It was as if I had become a ghost, a presence to be ignored until it hopefully faded away. I was just waiting. I knew Arthur's first shots would take a couple of business days to land. I just had to be patient. The first crack in their perfect facade appeared on a Tuesday morning. My phone, which had been silent for days, suddenly buzzed to life on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a smiling picture of Sarah from a family vacation years ago. My first instinct was a lifetime of conditioning. Answer it, soothe her, fix it. My finger hovered over the green accept button. But then I looked at the black binder sitting on the chair, my silent, powerful ally. I took a breath, steeled my nerves, and answered. "Mom." Her voice was sharp, brittle with annoyance. There was no hello, no how are you, no are you still in the house. It was pure, Unfiltered entitlement. The bakery's main supplier account is frozen. The flour company just called. They said the automatic payment for our biggest delivery of the week was rejected. They mentioned something about a guarantor review on the business account. You need to call them right now and fix whatever mess you made. A mess I made. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it nearly made me laugh. I felt a hot flash of rage crawl up my neck, but I forced my voice to remain perfectly level, almost detached. "Hello, Sarah," I said, the politeness a weapon in itself. I could hear an impatient sigh on the other end of the line, a sound I knew so well. It was the sound she made when I was taking too long to find my keys, or when I asked her to repeat something. "Did you hear me?" she snapped. "The account is frozen. I have a huge catering order for the mayor's office this weekend. It's a massive contract. I need that flour delivery today. I'm afraid those accounts are no longer my concern, Sarah," I said. The words felt wonderful, like stepping out of a pair of shoes that had been pinching my feet for 30 years. They were liberating. "What are you talking about?" she sputtered, her voice rising in disbelief. "Your name is on the loan. It's your responsibility to handle this bank stuff. You've always handled it." "No," I said, and for the first time, I felt a spark of the woman I used to be before I became just Mom return. My responsibility was to love you and support you. My mistake was assuming that was a two-way street. I hung up the phone before she could form another word. My hand was shaking, a fine tremor running up my arm, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline, the sheer intoxicating thrill of taking back my power one small word at a time. I had just said no to my daughter. A complete, unequivocal no. And the world hadn't ended. An hour later, as I was starting to wonder what my next move should be, I got a text. It was from a woman named Rose, a kind soul I had met a few months ago at the local farmer's market. She owned the flower shop downtown, a charming little place called Petals and Pots. We had bonded over a shared love for hydrangeas. The day after the Thanksgiving dinner, in a moment of desperation, I had sent her a simple text. "I'm in a difficult situation. Do you know of any small apartments for rent?" She had replied instantly, "I have an empty studio above my shop. It's yours for as long as you need it." No questions asked. She was a true port in a storm. Her text message now was simple and to the point. "Just heard from my friend Brenda at the power company. The lights are out at the Sweet Rise. Apparently, their automatic payment was declined this morning." A slow, grim smile spread across my face. The electricity bill. It was still linked to an old joint account David and I had opened decades ago. An account I had kept open for emergencies and sentimental reasons. An account I had quietly, meticulously emptied the day after I called Arthur. The bakery had gone dark. Right in the middle of the Tuesday morning coffee rush. I could picture the scene with perfect clarity. The hiss of the espresso machine dying, the lights flickering out, the credit card machine going dead. The chaos. The frantic calls. The angry, caffeine-deprived customers. That evening I decided it was time. I found a single forgotten suitcase in the back of the guest room closet. I packed methodically. I took the sturdy, practical sweaters David had bought me, the comfortable shoes, my mother's old recipe book. I left behind the frilly blouses Sarah had given me for various Christmases, the ones that never felt like me. I didn't take a single photo, not one sentimental trinket. They could keep the ghosts. I was taking the future. With my suitcase in one hand and the black binder in the other, I walked through the silent house. It was legally, partially mine, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a museum of a life that was over. I didn't see Sarah or Mark. I imagined they were holed up in their master suite, trying to figure out how their perfect world had suddenly started to short-circuit. I walked out the front door without a single word to them, closing it softly behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't need the drama. A quiet exit, I was learning, can be just as devastating as a loud one. It's more final. I drove to Rose's flower shop, the little bell above her back door chiming as I entered. She was waiting for me with a steaming mug of chamomile tea and a key. The apartment was small, just a single room with a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was clean and bright. The air smelled of eucalyptus and roses from the shop below, a scent of life and growth. It was mine. "Are you going to be okay?" Rose asked, her kind eyes full of a concern that was blessedly free of pity. I took a sip of the hot tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. I looked out the window at the quiet main street, at the lights of the town I had lived in my whole life. "Rose," I said, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible just a few days ago. "I think I'm just getting started." They thought it was a series of unfortunate glitches, a run of bad luck. They were about to find out it was a meticulously planned demolition, and I was holding the detonator. The first week in my new apartment felt like coming up for air after being underwater for a decade. The quiet was a balm to my raw, jangled nerves. In the mornings, I would wake up to the gentle sunlight streaming through the large window and the faint, sweet smell of flowers wafting up from Rose's shop. It was a peaceful, beautiful existence. I spent my days helping Rose, my hands busy arranging bouquets of lilies and hydrangeas, trimming the stems of roses, my mind blessedly empty of everything but the task at hand. In the evenings, I'd sit by my window with a cup of tea, watch the world go by on Main Street, and feel the tight, painful knot of anxiety in my chest finally begin to unravel. But my hands, accustomed to a lifetime of work, kneading dough, typing reports, mending clothes, planting gardens, needed something more to do. They grew restless. One rainy Friday afternoon, I found a bag of flour and some sugar in the small pantry Rose had so thoughtfully stocked for me. On a whim, I decided to bake. I didn't have a stand mixer, just a simple bowl and a wooden spoon, but the familiar motions felt right, grounding. I made a batch of my mother's molasses ginger cookies, the rich, spicy scent of cinnamon, cloves, and ginger filling my small apartment and chasing away the last of the shadows. It was the first time I had felt a flicker of genuine, uncomplicated joy since that horrible Thanksgiving dinner. I brought a plate of the still warm cookies downstairs to Rose. She was wrestling with a large order for a wedding, her brow furrowed in concentration. She took a cookie without looking, popped it in her mouth, and then froze. Her eyes widened. "Carol," she said, her mouth full of cookie. She swallowed. "This is heavenly. This is better than anything they sell at that fancy, overpriced bakery down the street." She meant Sarah's bakery, of course. She looked at me, a sudden brilliant idea lighting up her face. "You should sell these." I laughed, a real genuine laugh that startled me. "Oh, Rose, don't be silly. I'm 62 years old. I'm not about to start a new career." But the seed was planted, and it refused to be ignored. I started baking every day, working my way through my mother's old, handwritten recipe book. Banana bread with toasted walnuts and a hint of nutmeg. Buttery, flaky scones studded with dried cranberries and orange zest. A simple, perfect apple pie with a lattice crust that David had always said was my superpower. I gave it all away, to Rose, to the mailman who always looked exhausted, to Mr. Henderson who ran the hardware store next door. And every single person said the same thing in one way or another. "You should sell this." A week later, I was walking down Main Street after dropping off a fresh batch of lemon bars at the library, and I saw it. A for rent sign in the window of a tiny storefront right across the street from the gleaming, sophisticated facade of the Sweet Rise. It was a small, dusty space, probably no bigger than my studio apartment, tucked between the hardware store and a dusty antique shop. It had been empty for years, but the windows were large and it got the full morning sun. A crazy, audacious, terrifying idea began to form in my mind. It felt like a little spark at first, and then it grew into a roaring fire. What if I did? What if I took the one thing I had left that was truly indisputably mine, my mother's recipes, my love of baking, my two hands, and I built something new? Something for myself? Something that no one could ever take away from me? I called the number on the sign that very afternoon. The landlord was an older man named Sal who was more interested in having a quiet, reliable tenant who paid on time than he was in making a huge profit. The rent was surprisingly, blessedly affordable. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my small table with a legal pad, my checkbook, and the black binder. I looked at the numbers. The money from my retirement account that had been foolishly poured into Sarah's business. The house that I was a legal part owner of. I wasn't a penniless old woman cast out on the street. I had resources. I had capital. I had been funding someone else's dream for years. It was time to fund my own. And I had a name. An act of pure, unadulterated defiance that made me smile in the dark. The next day I signed the lease. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of frantic, joyous activity. I was up at dawn and worked until I collapsed into bed at night. I scrubbed floors, patched plaster, and painted the walls a cheerful buttery yellow. I bought second-hand equipment, a sturdy, used commercial mixer from a restaurant supply store, dozens of baking sheets from a thrift shop, a simple wooden counter I found at a flea market and sanded down myself. Rose was my partner in crime. She brought me coffee in the mornings and helped me paint in the evenings, her easy laughter filling the empty space. "What are you going to call it?" she asked me one night as we sat on the dusty floor, covered in paint splatters, sharing a pizza out of the box. I took a deep breath, the name feeling both terrifying and thrilling on my tongue. "The Scrappy Piglet Pantry," I said. Rose stared at me for a full 10 seconds, her mouth agape. Then she threw her head back and let out a huge booming laugh that echoed in the empty shop. "Oh, Carol," she finally said, wiping a tear from her eye. "That is brilliant. Absolutely wickedly brilliant. I love it." I was taking back the insult. I was owning it. I was going to turn the ugliest word my daughter ever threw at me into my brand, my banner of independence. This wouldn't be a place of shame. This would be a place where people felt welcomed and nourished. A place where no one was ever judged for wanting a second helping. With Rose's help, I painted the sign myself. My hands were shaking a little, not from fear, but from a thrilling, terrifying excitement. The letters were a cheerful looping script in a dark forest green. The Scrappy Piglet Pantry. We hung it in the freshly cleaned window, directly facing the sweet rise across the street. It was a declaration of war written in sugar, flour, and a whole lot of nerve. I had no idea that this little sign, this small act of defiance, was about to start a firestorm in our quiet little town. I opened my doors on a Tuesday morning with no fanfare. There was no grand opening, no balloons, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just a simple handwritten sign on a chalkboard easel out on the sidewalk. Fresh-baked molasses cookies and hot coffee. "Come say hello." The little bell I'd installed above the door chimed for the first time, and my first customer was the mailman, Randy, his curiosity piqued by the new shop. He bought a cookie and a coffee, told me it was the best cookie he'd had in 20 years, and left with a smile. For the next few weeks, that's how it was. A slow but steady trickle of customers. People from the neighborhood who were happy to see the empty storefront finally occupied. The other shop owners on the street. People who were, I soon learned, tired of the expensive, slightly pretentious pastries and aloof service from the chic bakery across the street. They didn't know my story. They just knew my scones were buttery and light, my coffee was strong and hot, and I always greeted them with a genuine smile. They came for the food, but I think they stayed for the feeling. My little pantry was warm and welcoming. I remembered people's names and their usual orders. I'd throw an extra chocolate chip cookie in the bag for a young mom who looked like she was having a rough day. It was more than a business. It was becoming a community hub. A place where people felt seen. Meanwhile, across the street, the cracks were turning into gaping chasms. Rose was my primary source of intelligence. She'd hear things from her customers, who would then come to my shop and tell me. Sarah had to let go of 2 of her longtime baristas because she couldn't make payroll. Their catering orders, the most lucrative part of their business, were drying up because their credit with the specialty food suppliers was shot. The word on the street was that the stress was causing huge, screaming fights between Sarah and Mark. Fights that could sometimes be heard from the sidewalk. I felt a grim satisfaction, I'll admit it. But it was always overshadowed by a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't what I had ever wanted. I had just wanted respect. The tipping point, the moment everything accelerated beyond my wildest dreams, came about a month after I opened. A young woman named Lucy, bright-eyed and energetic, came into the pantry. She had a friendly smile and carried a small notebook. She introduced herself as a freelance journalist and local food blogger for the county's most popular online news site. "I've been hearing about your shop for weeks," she said, ordering a slice of my apple pie and a cup of tea. "People are raving about your baking. But they're also talking about the name." She looked at me curiously, her pen poised over her notebook. "There's a real story there, isn't there?" I hesitated. For weeks I had been the quiet, friendly baker. I hadn't told my personal story to a single customer. Felt too raw, too personal. But looking at this young woman's earnest, intelligent face, I made a split-second decision. It was time. The truth deserved to be heard. I wiped my hands on my apron, brought over a cup of tea for myself, and sat down with her at one of my two small tables. And over the next hour I told her everything. The Thanksgiving dinner. The insult that felt like a slap. The years of sacrifice. The black binder that changed everything. I didn't do it with anger or self-pity. I just stated the facts of my life, my voice low and steady. She listened intently, her pen flying across the page. When I finished, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "That's not just a story about a bakery, Mrs. Peterson," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "That's a story about dignity. About the invisible work that women do every single day." The blog post went up the next morning. It was the lead story on the news site's homepage and was shared to the town's main Facebook community page. The title was a stroke of genius. The Piglet That Roared. How one Ohio mother turned a cruel insult into the sweetest success. It was like setting a match to a field of dry tinder. The story didn't just get shares. It exploded. By noon it had over 500 shares. By the end of the day it was in the thousands. It had broken out of our little town and was being shared in surrounding communities, then across the state. The comments section was a tidal wave of support and shared outrage. "This is my mother's story. This is my story. Thank you for writing this. I am driving 40 miles from Columbus this weekend to buy a pie from this absolute queen. We have to support women like this. My mother-in-law needs to see this. It's the story of every woman who has ever been taken for granted, silenced and dismissed. The Sweet Rise Bakery should be ashamed of itself. I've been a customer for years, but I'll never set foot in there again." My little pantry was swamped. A line formed out the door and snaked down the sidewalk, past the hardware store. People came not just to buy pastries, but to give me a thumbs up through the window, to share a quick, whispered story of their own family struggles, to thank me for speaking up. They saw their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts, themselves in my story. I was no longer just Carol the baker. I was a symbol. That afternoon, in the middle of the happy chaos, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her name flashed on the screen, a beacon of what I could only assume was pure fury. I looked at the line of smiling, supportive faces waiting to be served. I looked at the name of my shop, my brand, my victory painted proudly on the glass. I silenced the call and slid the phone back into my apron pocket. I had nothing left to say to her. The internet, in all its righteous fury, was saying it all for me. The viral blog post was more than just a public relations disaster for Sarah. It was a wrecking ball aimed at the crumbling foundations of her business. The bank, which was already scrutinizing their loan with the suspicion of a hawk, saw the article. Arthur forwarded me the email from our loan officer. It was clipped and cold. A quiet partnership dispute was one thing. A widely circulated, deeply personal story that painted one partner as a cruel, ungrateful villain, and the other as a beloved, triumphant folk hero was a credit risk they simply couldn't ignore. Arthur called me the next day, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "The bank is calling an emergency meeting," he said. "Next Monday. They want both named partners, that's you and Sarah, present to discuss the ongoing viability and severe reputational damage to the business. Carol, they're threatening to call in the loan. They want their 200 grand back, and they want it now. Calling in a commercial loan of that size would mean immediate, irreversible bankruptcy. The empire wasn't just teetering on the edge of a cliff anymore. It was actively crumbling into the sea. But before that fateful meeting could even happen, Sarah's mother-in-law decided it was time for her to intervene. Veronica, Mark's mother, was a woman who had perfected the art of looking down her nose at people. I was the simple baker's wife who had somehow lucked into a nice house. She was the wife of a successful dentist who belonged to the country club. She dripped with quiet condescension and perfume that always smelled faintly of disappointment. For years I had endured her backhanded compliments. "Oh, Carol, it's so charming that you still make your own pie crusts," and passive-aggressive remarks at every family gathering. She chose to make her move on a Saturday afternoon, my busiest day. The pantry was packed, the energy warm and happy. The line was, as it had been for a week, almost to the door. I was carefully boxing up a dozen of my signature cranberry orange scones for a customer when the bell on the door chimed with a violent, angry force. Veronica stood there, her face a mask of cold fury, her ridiculously expensive designer handbag clutched in her white-knuckled fist. She marched directly to the counter, completely ignoring the 24 waiting customers, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on my simple wooden floor. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice a low and venomous thing, but deliberately loud enough for the entire shop to hear. The happy chatter died instantly. A shocked silence fell over the room. Every eye in the place turned to us. "Excuse me, Veronica," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "As you can see, there's a line." "Don't you talk to me about lines," she spat, her lip curling in a sneer. "You are a vindictive, manipulative, pathetic old woman, trying to ruin your own daughter's life out of spite, airing your sordid family drama for the whole world to see. You have no class, no dignity." My blood ran cold then hot. To be attacked like this in my own sanctuary, the one place I had built where I felt safe, in front of the very community that had embraced me, it was a profound violation. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but I didn't get the chance. "The only one who ruined anything, Veronica," a strong, clear voice called out from the back of the shop, "was the daughter who forgot who built her pedestal in the first place. It was Rose." She had come in through the back with a large vase of fresh peonies for my counter, and had witnessed the whole ugly scene. She walked slowly toward the counter, wiping her hands on her floral apron, her expression as calm and fearless as a lioness protecting her cub. Veronica whirled around to face her, clearly shocked to be challenged. "This has nothing to do with you, you nosy little shop girl." Rose didn't even flinch. She placed the vase of flowers on the counter with a soft thud, a deliberate, calming presence in the middle of the storm. "Oh, it has everything to do with me," she said, her voice ringing with a quiet authority that commanded the attention of the entire room. "Carol is my friend. And this shop," she gestured around the warm, fragrant room, filled with supportive, watching faces, "is a pillar of our community now, a place of kindness. Your daughter's shop, on the other hand, seems to have a severe integrity problem." She took a step closer to Veronica. "Now, I suggest you take your bitterness and your very large handbag, and you leave my friend's place of business before you embarrass yourself any further." You could have heard a pin drop. Veronica's face, which had been flushed with rage, went from pale to beet red and back again in a matter of seconds. She looked around at the silent, staring faces of the other customers, all of them looking at her with undisguised contempt. An older man in a flannel shirt slowly shook his head at her in disgust. A young mother instinctively pulled her child a little closer. Veronica had expected to find a weak, ashamed old woman she could intimidate into silence. Instead, she had walked into a fortress, and that fortress was defended by a loyal army of ordinary people who were tired of bullies. Without another word, her face a grotesque mask of fury and humiliation, she turned on her heel and practically fled from the shop. The moment the door closed behind her, the entire pantry erupted in spontaneous applause. People were cheering, whistling. The woman at the front of the line, a kindly-looking woman in her 70s, leaned in and whispered, "You tell us the word, Carol, and we'll go picket her son's dental office." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. I looked at Rose, my fierce, wonderful friend who had stood up for me without a moment's hesitation. I looked at the faces of my customers, my neighbors, my community. I wasn't alone. I had a new family. A family that saw me, that respected me, and that was ready to fight for me. Sarah had kicked me out of a house, but in doing so, she had pushed me into a true home. The disastrous public confrontation with Veronica seemed to be the final, fatal straw. The story of her epic humiliation spread through our small town even faster than the original blog post. It became the stuff of local legend. She had intended to shame me into submission, but she had only succeeded in making herself, and by extension Sarah and Mark, look like a family of cruel, entitled bullies. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict, and it was unanimous. A few days later, on a quiet Tuesday evening, just as I was getting ready to close up the pantry for the night, I saw a familiar figure hesitating outside the glass door. It was Mark. He stood on the sidewalk under the warm glow of the streetlight for a long moment, his shoulders slumped in defeat, his hand hovering near the doorknob as if he couldn't decide whether to knock or to run. He looked diminished, thinner, older, as if the constant stress of the past few weeks had hollowed him out from the inside, leaving only a shell. Finally, he took a deep, shaky breath and pushed the door open. The little bell chimed softly, announcing his arrival. He didn't meet my eyes. He walked to the counter, his gaze fixed on the floor, and placed a thin manila folder on the wooden surface. His hands were shaking slightly, a detail that surprised me. I had only ever seen him as confident, arrogant, always in control. "Carol," he said, his voice raspy and low. He cleared his throat. I brought this for you." I looked down at the folder, then back at his face. He still wouldn't look at me, focusing instead on a stray crumb on the counter, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. Cautiously, I opened the folder. Inside, on top, was a freshly notarized copy of the emergency custody agreement, the one I had signed years ago and Arthur had found in the binder. It was the same document, but this one was newly affirmed and filed with the county court, a clear unilateral legal signal that they were not going to fight me on it. It was a white flag of surrender. It was an acknowledgement of my role in their children's lives. Beneath it was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a child's notebook. It was a drawing in crayon. A wobbly-looking house with a smiling stick figure, me I assumed, given the halo of gray scribbles for hair, standing next to two smaller stick figures. At the bottom, in the clumsy, earnest print of a first grader, was a message. "We miss your pancakes, Grandma. We love you. Love, Leo and Mia." A lump formed in my throat so thick and painful I couldn't swallow. This was the first I had heard from my grandchildren in all this time. This simple drawing, this innocent, loving message, hurt more than all the insults and anger combined. They were the real victims in this ugly war. Two little children caught in a crossfire they couldn't possibly understand. Mark finally looked up, and when he did, I saw the deep, soul-crushing shame in his eyes. It was real. "I know I was silent when I shouldn't have been," he mumbled, the words coming out in a painful, disjointed rush. I thought staying out of it was keeping the peace. I didn't want to pick a side between my wife and my mother-in-law. It was cowardly. I know that now." He wrung his hands, twisting his gold wedding band around and around his finger. "But silence doesn't feed children, Carol. It doesn't pay the bills. And it sure as hell doesn't save families. Just lets things rot. From the inside out." He took another shaky breath. "She's not herself. She's drowning. She sits in the dark and cries all night. She won't talk to me. She won't talk to anyone. And I let it get this far. I enabled her. It was easier than facing what we did to you. What I let happen to you that day at the table." He pushed the folder a little closer to me across the counter. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," he said quickly, as if afraid I would think that was his angle. "I know that ship has sailed and we burned the damn dock. I had to come here and admit it. To you. Everything that's still standing, those kids, our crumbling marriage, what's left of her business, it was all built on your back. We were just too stupid and arrogant to look down." He didn't wait for me to respond. He didn't ask for forgiveness or absolution. He just nodded once, a gesture of final, exhausted defeat, and walked out of the shop, the little bell chiming his sad retreat. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, my fingers tracing the waxy crayon outline of my stick figure self, holding hands with my grandchildren. My heart wasn't angry anymore. It was just heavy with the weight of it all. This didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tragedy that was finally, painfully being acknowledged. The bank meeting was scheduled for the following Monday morning at 10 a.m. sharp. Arthur had called me the Friday before to prep me. "All you need to do is show up, Carol," he'd said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Just sit there and be the picture of quiet dignity." The bank, spooked by the public drama and the clear, irreconcilable partnership dispute, is almost certainly going to freeze all assets until a formal dissolution of the partnership can be legally agreed upon. For the Sweet Rise, it's a death sentence. And they know it. The day before the meeting, a Sunday, she came. I was alone in the pantry. I always came in for a few hours on Sundays when the shop was closed, to do my weekly inventory and prep the doughs for the week ahead. It was my quiet time, a peaceful ritual. I was humming along to an old song on the radio, my hands covered in flour, when I saw her through the front window. A silhouette against the bright afternoon sun. It was Sarah. She stood across the street for a long time, just staring at my little shop with its cheerful, defiant sign. Then, with a visible squaring of her shoulders, She walked across the street. My heart started pounding against my ribs, a frantic drum. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a fight-or-flight response that made my palms sweat. This was it. The confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating for weeks. I quickly wiped my hands on my apron and stood behind the counter, my only fortress. The bell chimed. Sarah stepped inside, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was pulled back in a messy, listless bun. There were dark, puffy circles under her eyes, the kind that come from sleepless nights and endless crying. She was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, not her usual power businesswoman attire of tailored blazers and sharp angles. She looked like a lost girl. She stopped just inside the door, her eyes scanning the room as if seeing it for the first time. She looked at the simple wooden tables, the chalkboard menu written in my own loopy handwriting, the glass case filled with the very pastries, the scones, the croissants, the muffins, that I had taught her how to bake when she was a teenager in my old kitchen. Her gaze was filled with a confusing, painful mix of anger, disbelief, and something that looked agonizingly like regret. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her eyes finally met mine across the empty shop. I was overwhelmed. I was stressed about that huge catering order for the mayor's office. Mark and I had been fighting for weeks about money. It came out. It was an excuse. A pathetic, flimsy justification for a moment of profound, calculated cruelty. She wasn't taking responsibility. She was just trying to explain away the ugliness, to minimize it, to make it about her stress instead of her character. I remained behind the counter, my hands resting on the cool wood. I felt a strange, almost out-of-body sense of detachment, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. The white-hot rage and the sharp stabbing pain of the past few weeks had cooled into something else, something harder and clearer, like tempered steel. "Stressed," I repeated, my voice quiet, but it carried in the silent shop. "I was stressed when your father died suddenly, and I had to figure out how to be both a mother and a father to a grieving teenage girl, while working 2 jobs to make sure your college fund was full. I was overwhelmed when I sat with you through every single colic-filled night after Leo was born so that you could get some sleep before you had to open the bakery at 5 a.m. We are all stressed, Sarah. We are all overwhelmed. It is not an excuse to be cruel. It is not a license to humiliate someone who loves you." Tears started to stream down her face, the silent, ugly tears of someone who has run out of arguments. "I know. Mom, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Please." She took a step closer, her hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. "The bank meeting is tomorrow. You can't do this. You can't destroy everything I've worked for. It's my whole life. My whole life. The life I had paid for. The life I had guaranteed with my own security. The life that was legally half mine." I slowly, deliberately, untied the strings of my apron and folded it, placing it on the counter between us. It was a gesture I had made 1,000 times, the simple domestic act of ending a day's work. But this felt different. It felt final. I looked at my daughter, this stranger with a familiar face, and I felt a deep, profound sadness for the beautiful, trusting relationship we had lost. A loss more significant than any amount of money. "I don't serve apologies here, Sarah," I said, my voice gentle but as unbreakable as stone. "Only bread and truth." I paused, letting the words hang in the heavy air between us, letting her truly hear them. "And on that Thanksgiving day," I continued, my voice never rising, my gaze never wavering, "you offered me neither." The last flicker of hope in her eyes died. The fight went out of her, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She saw it then. She saw that there was no magic word, no tearful plea, no perfectly crafted apology that could fix what she had so thoroughly broken. She had come here looking for a mother's soft heart, a lifetime of conditioned forgiveness, a weakness she could exploit to save her business. And instead, she had found a businesswoman, partner, a creditor who had come to collect. She just stared at me for a long silent moment, the tears falling unheeded onto her shirt. Then she gave a single, shuddering nod of understanding, of surrender. She turned without another word and walked out of my shop, out of my life, the little bell chiming a final sorrowful goodbye. I thought that might be the last time I'd speak to her directly. I thought the war was finally over. But I was wrong. In many ways, the hardest part was yet to come. The bank meeting was exactly as Arthur had predicted. A bloodless corporate execution. I sat next to him at one end of a long, intimidating conference table. Sarah and Mark sat at the other end, their own lawyer, a young, nervous-looking man who looked completely out of his depth, positioned between them. Sarah wouldn't look at me. She stared at a water stain on the ceiling as if it held the secrets of the universe. Mark just stared at his hands. The bank executive, a man named Mr. Davies, was brisk and ruthlessly professional. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He laid out the terms in a cold monotone. Due to the irresolvable partnership dispute, the significant and ongoing reputational damage to the business, and the instability of the guarantor agreement, the bank was officially freezing the line of credit and calling the $200,000 loan. They had 90 days to pay it back in full. It was over. A death sentence delivered in a quiet, air-conditioned room. There was no way they could come up with that kind of money in 90 days. The sweet rise was finished. As we filed out of the room, I felt no triumphant surge, no thrill of victory. I just felt empty, tired. The year that followed was a blur of legal proceedings. A slow, grinding process handled entirely by Arthur. The dissolution of the business was messy and complicated. There were suppliers to be paid, assets to be appraised and liquidated. As a 50% partner, I was legally entitled to half of whatever was left after the debts were settled. It wasn't much. The new ovens were sold at a steep loss. The brand name was now worthless, but it was something. The house was sold next. It was another painful process. Another piece of my past dismantled and sold to strangers. As a co-owner on the deed, I was legally entitled to a significant share of the equity. I instructed Arthur to take back only my original investment of $100,000, plus a small fair amount for appreciation over the years. I could have fought for more, but I didn't want to. This was never about the money. It was about the principle. Sarah and Mark used their share to buy a much smaller townhouse in the next county over. I heard all of this through Arthur, who heard it from their lawyer. Sarah and I never spoke a single word to each other. Meanwhile, my life continued to move in a direction I never could have imagined. The scrappy Piglet pantry thrived. It became more than a shop. It was the unofficial heart of Main Street. I had to hire 2 part-time employees, both older women who had been struggling to find work, to help me keep up with the demand. My days were filled with the warm, comforting smell of baking bread, the cheerful, constant chiming of the bell on the door, and the lively chatter of happy customers. I was making a good living, a better and more secure one than I had in years. I had my own apartment, my own successful business, my own life. I was happy, truly. But as the months turned into a year, I realized something was still missing. My victory felt personal, small. I had saved myself, but what about all the other women out there like me? The idea came to me after a conversation with one of my new employees. A sweet woman named Eleanor who had been a bookkeeper for the same company for 30 years before they restructured her position away. I sent out over 100 resumes, Carol, she told me one afternoon as we glazed lemon scones. I didn't get a single call back. I felt like the world was telling me I was expired. Her words, expired, hit me like a physical blow. I saw myself in her fear. I saw the woman I could have been if David hadn't been so prescient, if I hadn't found that black binder. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Eleanor and all the other women like her. Women who had spent their lives building things for other people. Families, careers for their husbands, stable homes, only to find themselves adrift and invisible in their later years. The next morning I called Arthur. I want to start a foundation, I told him, the idea fully formed in my mind. I want to use this money for something more. And so with Arthur's legal guidance, the Piglet Fund was born. It wasn't a huge splashy foundation, but it was mine and it was real. I seeded it with a significant portion of the money I had gotten from the sale of the house and the dissolution of the bakery. Its mission was simple and direct: to provide small, no-interest startup loans and mentorship to women over 50 in our county who wanted to start their own small businesses. The first loan went to Eleanor. She used it to buy a new computer and accounting software, and she started a home-based bookkeeping service for small businesses like mine. She was my first client. The second loan went to a woman who had been a seamstress her whole life and wanted to open an Etsy shop selling handmade quilts. The third went to a retired teacher who started a local tutoring service for underprivileged kids. I was no longer just a baker. I was creating a new legacy, one that had nothing to do with my own family drama, and everything to do with building a community of strong, independent, unexpired women. I was using the money that had come from such a painful ending to create dozens of new beginnings. Felt good. Felt right. I was finally feeding people in a way that truly nourished their souls. But even as I was building this new life, a piece of the old one, a piece I thought was gone forever, was about to come knocking on my door. And I had a choice to make. It arrived on a crisp golden autumn afternoon, almost exactly a year to the day after that fateful Thanksgiving. It wasn't in an envelope. It was a single folded piece of blue construction paper, tucked carefully inside my mailbox, addressed simply to Grandma. My heart, which had been beating so steadily and peacefully for months, did a painful little flip-flop. I carried it upstairs to my sun-filled apartment, my hands trembling just a little. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one that looked out over Main Street, and carefully unfolded it. The paper was covered in an explosion of stickers, cartoon dinosaurs, glittery stars, puffy kittens. Inside, written in the big, wobbly, earnest letters of a child just learning to write, was a message. "Dear Grandma," it read, "we are having a special dinner just for us. Can you come? We planned it. There will be chicken nuggets and mac and cheese from the blue box." The specificity of the blue box made me smile through the sudden sting of tears. That had always been their favorite. At the bottom of the page were two small, carefully rendered signatures. Leo and Mia. I just sat there staring at it. The colorful, innocent invitation felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Chicken nuggets. I hadn't seen my grandchildren in person for nearly a year. After the house was sold and they moved, our contact had dwindled to short, stilted video calls, always supervised by a tense-looking Sarah who hovered just off-screen. The calls were awkward and painful, full of long silences and things left unsaid. Eventually, they just stopped altogether. I told myself it was for the best, to protect my own healing heart. But the truth was, the silence was a constant, aching void in my life. This invitation, it was an olive branch. A small crayon-scented olive branch, offered by two little hands that had no idea about the brutal war their family had fought. My first powerful instinct was self-preservation. To say no. To protect the new peaceful life I had so carefully constructed. Why would I risk walking back into that minefield of pain and potential betrayal? The wound, though scarred over, was still there. A tender spot in my heart that ached whenever I allowed myself to think of them for too long. Going back felt like inviting new pain. But then I looked at their names so carefully written at the bottom of the page. They weren't to blame for any of this. They were just children who missed their grandmother. Children who associated me with love and pancakes and macaroni and cheese from a blue box. Was I going to punish them for the sins of their parents? That evening, unable to resolve the turmoil in my own head, I took the invitation down to the flower shop. Rose was closing up for the night, trimming the stems off a bucket of beautiful white roses, her movements practiced and calm. I handed her the card without a word. She wiped her hands on her apron and read it, her expression softening. She looked up at me, her kind eyes full of understanding. "Wow," she said softly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I confessed, sinking onto a stool by her work table. The earthy scent of the roses filled the air. "I don't know if I can face her, Rose. I don't know if I have it in me to sit at a table with her again, to pretend to make small talk." Rose finished with her roses, placing them one by one into a large vase. She came over and placed a gentle hand on my arm. Her hands always smelled faintly of earth and green leaves, the smell of things that grow. "Then don't," she said simply. I looked at her, confused by her answer. "You don't have to go back to the way things were, Carol," she explained, her voice soft but firm, cutting through my confusion. "That house is gone. That big fancy dinner table is gone. That version of your family, the one built on your silence, is gone forever. You don't have to pretend it isn't." She squeezed my arm gently. "But you can always choose to move forward. To a new house. A new, smaller table. You just have to decide if that's a table you're willing to sit at. For them." She nodded toward the card. Her words were simple, but they were a revelation. This wasn't a summons to return to the past. It was an invitation to a different future. It wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. It was about my grandchildren. I held that little card in my hand all night, sitting by my window, watching the headlights of the cars sweep across my wall. The glitter from the star stickers came off on my fingertips. Was this a trap? Was it some desperate scheme of Sarah's to try and get something from me, to appeal to my love for the children? Or was it just what it appeared to be? A simple, heartfelt request from two little kids who missed their grandma. Was I willing to sit at a new table, even if it was uncomfortable? Even if it was piled high with the wreckage of the past? I made my decision the next morning, not with my head but with my heart. The heart of a grandmother. I drove to their new townhouse on a Saturday evening, my stomach in a tight knot of apprehension. My car was filled with the warm, comforting scent of the lemon poppy seed muffins I had baked, a small, safe offering. I found their address in a modest, quiet complex filled with young families. It was a world away from the grand colonial house with its sprawling lawn. As I walked up the short driveway, I could see little sticky handprints on the front window, and my heart ached with a familiar bittersweet pang of love. I took a deep, steadying breath and knocked on the door. Mark opened it. He looked better. The deep, haunted shame in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, weary resignation. He wasn't smiling, but he nodded at me with a new, genuine respect that had never been there before. "Carol," he said. "Thank you for coming. They're in the back. They're very excited." He led me through the small, tidy living room to a sliding glass door that opened onto a tiny, fenced-in concrete patio. And there it was. A small, round patio table, the kind you buy at a hardware store, set for four with colorful paper plates and napkins. A string of festive chili pepper-shaped lights was draped over the railing, casting a warm, gentle glow in the twilight. Sarah was standing by a small electric grill, her back to me, carefully turning chicken nuggets with a pair of tongs. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. Her eyes were wary, guarded, but they were also clear. The hardness was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness and something that looked like fragile hope. She didn't rush to hug me. She didn't offer a gushing, dramatic apology. She just gave me a small, hesitant nod. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Sarah," I said, my voice equally quiet. And then the screen door burst open, and the kids came tumbling out. "Grandma!" They yelled in joyous unison, launching themselves at my legs like two small, happy torpedoes. I knelt on the cold concrete and wrapped my arms around them, burying my face in their hair, breathing in the sweet, familiar scent of little kids. A mixture of shampoo, sunshine, and whatever they'd had for a snack. In that moment, all the anger, all the hurt, all the legal battles and bitter words, it all just melted away, replaced by the fierce, primal, unconditional love of a grandmother. We ate dinner at that little table. The chicken nuggets were slightly burnt on one side, and the macaroni and cheese was definitely from the blue box. It was a far cry from my elaborate, perfectly executed Thanksgiving feasts. But as the kids chattered and giggled, telling me all about their new school, their pet hamster named Squeaky, and a disastrous science fair project involving a baking soda volcano, I realized something profound. It wasn't about the food. It was never really about the food. It was about being seen. It was about being respected. After we finished eating, Mia, my serious little granddaughter, ran inside and came back out carrying a small, clumsily painted piece of wood. It looked like a piece of a broken-off shelf, sanded down mostly by little hands. In glitter glue and crooked, multicolored letters it said, "For Grandma Carol, who taught us what a real table is for." I took the sign from her, my throat thick with emotion. I traced the glittery, bumpy letters with my finger. A single tear I didn't know was coming rolled down my cheek. I looked across the table at Sarah. For the first time in over a year, she met my gaze and held it. And in her eyes, I didn't see the cruel stranger from that Thanksgiving dinner. I saw my daughter broken and humbled. A woman who had lost everything and was now, perhaps, starting to understand what was truly important. I didn't move back in. I didn't magically forgive and forget. Our relationship would never be what it was. Too much damage had been done. But as I hugged my grandchildren goodbye at the door an hour later, I felt the first tentative stitches beginning to close the gaping wound in our family. It was not a return to the past, but the possibility of a new, more honest future. I drove home that night, back to my apartment, to my bakery, to my life. I hadn't gotten revenge. I had gotten reclamation. I reclaimed my money, my dignity, and most importantly, I reclaimed myself. I learned that your value isn't determined by the seat you're given at someone else's table. It's determined by the table you build for yourself. And I learned that sometimes, you have to let a family fall apart completely so that you can have a chance to rebuild it on a stronger, more durable foundation. Not of obligation, but of truth and respect. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long and painful journey, but it was mine. And it led me to where I am today. I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to stand up for your own dignity, even when it was the hardest thing you've ever had to do? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your stories give strength and courage to all of us who are listening. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and reclamation. Remember, you are not alone.